and a big birthday. Almost 250 years ago, this nation was formed as a social experiment. Basically, a social experiment built around a prevailing set of values that our forefathers had adopted. I grew up about 30 miles from Thomas Jefferson's home, so understanding his life was a big part of where I grew up, and had a lot of knowledge, been to his home many, many times. Thomas Jefferson had been impacted by the Enlightenment in Europe. He actually served in France. Some of you remember as our Secretary of State right when Enlightenment and the Renaissance was taking place, to the point that it very much affected him and how he thought and what he believed. When he came back and he wrote earlier, before he'd ever gone to France, but he was writing from a man named Locke, who had written about 40 years earlier some principles for how you could govern people. And one of the things that he said was this, is that we all have inalienable rights. And then he lists them. He said, you have an inalienable right to life and to liberty. And then he makes this statement. Everybody know what it is? And the pursuit of happiness. Isn't it interesting? He said, you have a right to life. You have a right to liberty. He didn't say you have a right to be happy. I ain't got no love on this side. I'm going to go over here. He didn't say you have a right to life, liberty, and happiness. He said you have a right to life, liberty, but happiness is on you. He said, in other words, I'm going to put the ball in your lap on how happy, joyful your life is. And I want to talk a little bit today about what does it mean to be marked by joy. One of the things that is a part of this summer series, we talked about Christianity Light, we've been made for more, is that at the end of this summer, I pray we come out of here with people that have a defiant faith. A defiant faith. One like Job that said, even though, yet I will. See, there's sometimes we have faith that has never learned how to overcome in the difficult stages of our life. And because we've never learned to develop defiant faith, or what it is that gives us joy in the journey, we end up having a belief system that when life deals us a hand we weren't expecting, we don't have then defiant faith, we have deflated faith. I had no idea that Michael would tell part of his story today that out of disappointment, walked away from church. But here's what I came to tell somebody today, is that you and I can learn how to live a life of joy that the Bible calls is unspeakable, and it's full of glory. It's full of the glory of God. And you don't have to live it in church. Historically, for 250 years, since we have been pursuing happiness, people have looked for happiness in one of two places. First place they've looked for happiness is primarily in culture. Culture has thought to have been the center of happiness. In fact, if you listen to what has begun now to be, it seems like we're continually in elections. Anybody as bored as I am, it's like we're always running for something or from something. I don't know which one we're doing. But if you listen to even political candidates, it's like they promise a life that would never be reached by any political candidate. It's just not going to happen. But we trust culture to give us happiness. Because culture comes at us, and here's what they say to us. They say that your happiness is based on processes. If you can go through these processes, you can be happy. That's why go today to Amazon, go today to Barnes & Nobles, and go look on the shelf and see how many books that say things like this: 7 steps to a happy marriage, 5 steps to a successful business, 13 steps to how to have a better attitude. I picked up Men's Health magazine the other day. I saw it on the shelf. I don't get it. I saw it on the shelf and I looked at it and it said 759 ways to live the ultimate perfect life. 759. And they listed them all. Even the Old Testament only had 600 laws. And most of the 759 things that would get you to live the ultimate perfect life, which I think perfection is probably a little high to be shooting for. I mean, they move beyond happiness to the perfect life. And of the 759 things you could do to live the ultimate perfect life, most of them had to do with breaking the commandments, seeing how much beer you could drink, and how many women you could sleep with. But other than that, you could have the perfect life if you follow these processes. Because after all, happiness has got to be a formula. But if you were found out, and how many of you in this room have found out that there's no 5 easy steps to anything? Then the next thing we're told, and we're sold this bag of goods, that if you have certain possessions, you'll be happy. So then the whole world breaks into our television programs every 8 minutes and try to make us buy their junk, believing that somehow that's going to make us happy. They even now have got, I watched the other night, I tried to count them, in a 2-hour series of messages on ESPN, I had 9 commercials about underwear. Whether it had enough ventilation. And then they tried to prove what happens if you shut the vents off. I now realize why my granddaddy died. He didn't have vents. Who knew? I ain't got no help in the building. Y'all looking like, where are we going today? Huh? But if it's not that, it's toothpaste or jeans. I mean, you can never throw a ball like Brett Favre, but if you get those jeans, maybe you can be as happy as he is. Because after all, possessions are the key to happiness. If you own it, you'll be happy. And how many of you have owned it and your garage is full and now you're unhappy that you got to clean your garage out? And so if processes and possessions don't make you happy, then they come along and say, well, you're just not in the right place. If you'd get in the right place, then you'd find incredible happiness. In other words, a place like the bar. In other words, that should be a great thing to do. Why don't you go down, sit at a stool with other people as miserable as you are, and let's find out how great your night can become. You got to be happy if you get there. Because after all, after everybody becomes unconscious of what they're really doing, then everybody's happy about everything. Or maybe Hawaii. And if you can't find happiness in those places, the last resort, let's go to Vegas. Everybody's happy in Vegas, baby. And then culture tells you, if it's not processes and it's not possessions, not places, then it's got to be people. You got to get around happy people. You got to get around funny people. I did a survey this week when I was preparing. I found out that more comedians are depressed and suicidal. Because how many of you know everybody that laughs is not really happy? Being around successful people won't make you happy. Why? Because culture has no answer for the pursuit of happiness. It has no answer for joy. It makes you temporarily, I'm not crazy, it makes you temporarily happy, but no lasting happiness. Jesus talked about us receiving a joy that the world couldn't give. And the song says, and the world can't take it away. There is a sense of knowing an abiding joy that outlives events. So for culture can't change it. The other place that people go looking for joy or happiness primarily is they turn to religion. Religion. And today in America we have what I would classify as really a pop psychology spirituality. How many of you know everything that's spiritual is not necessarily with Jesus? There's a lot of spirituality in our nation today. I'm not afraid of America becoming atheistic. I actually believe we're polytheistic. We have multiple gods and we worship all of them at the same time. Thus, the word Miss Francis gave today is so very pertinent in our generation. Because, see, our world tells you that this is what religion is about. You need to find your truth. And when you find your truth, live your truth, and then you'll be happy with yourself. But your truth is not necessarily the truth. I really don't mean to offend Oprah. I hope she's not watching. But if she is, I just want to say you can't just live your truth. Truth is not a precept. Truth is a person. Jesus said, I am the truth. So you can have a religious experience that has absolutely nothing to do with God. Has nothing to do with Jesus. But it's a God of our own making. Bible says in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. God made man in his own image and his own likeness. Ever since then, man's been making God in his image and in his likeness. So we end up with a God that makes us comfortable, not necessarily one that we can worship. Am I doing okay? And then there's what I call the Genesis chapter 1 people. They never get beyond Genesis chapter 1. Don't read anything else in the Bible but Genesis chapter 1. And that is that God's the creator. He makes everything good, and God's good, and everything's great and wonderful and good, and everything's good. And I just love it because everything's good. And I wonder, where were they when my dish disposal didn't work? That odor was not good. Because see, what that philosophy in religion says is this: as long as I'm winning, as long as I'm blessed, and as long as I'm healthy, then I'm happy. I'm happy. See, there are people today that are not at church for the same reason Michael talked about. Because they were only prepared to win, and nobody ever taught them how to face challenges. They bought into a biblical spirituality that's not really biblical. It's based in man's self-help and feel better programs. Can I tell you something? The gospel is not a self-help program. The gospel doesn't change you from the outside in. The gospel changes you from the inside out. Because see, for all of the Genesis 1 people I read further in the Bible, there is a Genesis 3. And Genesis 3 says that we sinned. The earth became chaotic. Man started making bad choices. Family members killed each other. People end up betraying each other. There was pain. There was sickness. There was rejection. That is a part of the entire human narrative. And then all of a sudden, if I bought into a Genesis 1 philosophy that God's just good and there's nothing bad ever happens in my life, then I skipped Genesis chapter 3 and I forgot that there's got to be something in between here that'll give me hope to get up in the morning, lest I believe that inevitably we're all going to live in misery. I've got good news for you. Jesus said, I've come to be your example, your model. I'm going to show you what to do. So here's what Jesus said. I was betrayed. I was rejected. I was crucified. I was nailed. I was spat on. I had my beard plucked out. But in all of that, I never opened my mouth to revile. I never became cynical. I never lost faith in my Father. But I believed even in the point of death that were I to give up my spirit, He would send the Holy Spirit and raise me from the dead. So I trusted Him even in the most difficult days of my life. So James, the brother, half-brother of Jesus, begins to write in James chapter 1 these words. He said, James, a servant of God and the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. So let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature, complete, not lacking anything. I wonder what would happen if we started passing microphones down the aisles and say, if you have any need, just tell us what it is. I doubt we could get the mic across this building before the daylight ended today. Because the reality is we don't live as a people lacking anything. We most of the time live as a people who believe we've been denied and withheld from, and somehow we're disadvantaged, and that somehow God's not working on my behalf because I don't have what my friends at work have. Y'all gonna have to stay with me. I ain't got far to go, but I'm gonna get there. He begins this writing by saying, I'm James, I'm the half-brother of Jesus. But here's what he said is my status. I'm not claiming that I'm a part of the royal family. He said, because I'm going to write to you about how to have joy in difficult situations, so here's what I'm going to give you my title. I'm a servant. He literally uses the word slave. Now you have to understand something. God did not promote slavery. Even the Bible says that slavery, the way it was done in America, was wrong. It's a sin against God. But in the New Testament, there were people who chose to be slaves because of a love they had for the one that they were serving. They would take their ear to a post and allow it to be pierced so that they could become bondservants of the one that they adored. They gave up their rights to themselves in order to serve the one that they believed was worthy of their life. James said, first thing you need to know is that my happiness didn't come from me bartering my position. My happiness came from the fact I was willing to give it all up and become a servant. And he's writing to people that are scattered. In other words, he's writing to people that are part of what the Bible calls the diaspora. May I say to you, with all due respect, he's writing to exiles. People that were living as strangers in a foreign land. Sometimes we have forgotten how to really live victorious as exiles. While we look at an immigration issue in our country and want to claim native status, the truth of the matter is if you're a Christian, this is hostile territory. You are not a native. You are an exile. This is not your home. I got very few amens right there, but this is not your home. This belongs to God. He makes this statement. He said, count it or consider it all joy, or consider it pure joy. He makes a distinction in the translation I used on purpose in the NIV. He calls it pure joy. Everybody shout pure joy. Pure joy. He said, in other words, watch this. He said, count it that. Deem it to be so. In other words, I get to decide whether or not this is miserable or this is joyful. And he said the way you count it is by understanding that there are trials that come in many kinds. How many of you know there are all kinds of trials? Prosperous people have trials. See, some people that are broke said, boy, if I just had some money, I wouldn't have all this trial. No, you'd have another set of trials. Do you realize how difficult it is to manage wealth? Single people have trials. They think if I just could get married, I won't have these trials. Ding, 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 ding. It's called the alarm clock the day after. Why? Because married people have trials. How many of you know that employed people have trials? I can't stand my boss. Well, you know what? You could be unemployed. That's a whole nother set of trials. So in other words, there's no life that doesn't have trials. Now I realize there's some of them are the results of our bad choices. There's all kinds of things that happen that we may be responsible for. But the truth of the matter is there are trials that come from everywhere into everybody's. There's people sitting in this room that are facing trials. You have no idea what they're going through because they just hadn't told you. You remember the old church signs? There used to be church signs. I guess there's still some in Oklahoma City. I pass them every now and then. I used to love to read church signs because they said some of the craziest things. I saw one church sign one day. It said, feel like you're going through hell? Come early and listen to our choir practice. That's what it said. I don't think they meant that exactly like that. Like in the church bulletin one day I got, it said, if you have children and don't know it, we have a nursery. I don't know who had kids and didn't know it, but maybe so. Some of them are offensive. Like I saw this one that I got handed one time. It said, and the Weight Watchers Club will meet in the South Portico. Use the double door entrance. I thought, that's really insulting. You skinny sucker. But I passed this church sign one time. It says, no Jesus, no joy. Now, it wasn't N-O, no Jesus, N-O, joy, no joy. But then it was K-E-N-O-W. If you know Jesus, then you'll K-E-N-O-W, no joy. And I thought, that's pretty neat. No Jesus, no joy. But then I found out there are some things you can actually have joy in that has nothing to do with Jesus. Come on, somebody give me a break. Krispy Kreme is good if you're a heathen. Sometimes when the hot sign's on, I just want to go lay on the tray and say, just roll me down under the glaze. I think that would be so amazing. But the writer's making a distinction between things that may be pleasurable moments and things that are pure joy. Write this down quickly now. We'll be done. If you're going to understand Jesus' joy, first of all, you have to learn the distinction in trials. Let me tell you what I mean by that. There's a major difference between a temptation and a trial. A temptation is something that's to take you away from God. A trial is something that's bringing you closer to Him. A temptation is something to be resisted. A trial is something to be welcomed. A temptation weakens your faith. A trial will always strengthen your faith. The problem is that many of us spend time resisting what we should be welcoming, and we're accepting what we should be resisting. I didn't get a whole lot of amens right there. We keep welcoming temptation and resisting struggle. And because we don't understand the wisdom of discerning the difference, we miss the benefits of what difficult moments in our life bring to us. We miss the wisdom of them. See, listen, it's important for me to discern some things. I want to help some parents here. Some things that are going on in your teenager is not a demon. It is called puberty. You can't cast it out. No prayer line can remove it. Come on. You just pray that 15 turns to 16 and quickly turns to 18. Come on, somebody help me. And you hope they don't have an extended case. There are some things that the enemy does send forces to frustrate us, to frustrate your purpose. That's what Ezra said. He said, our enemies hired counselors to frustrate our purposes. And then there are some things that are just pure assignments from hell that come to take your faith out. And you have to distinguish what is coming into my life. Listen, if she's batting her eyes and saying sweet nothings to me, and she doesn't have my last name, that's not a trial.
That's right. That's right.
Let me help you, Bubba. That is not a trial. That's a temptation. And you need to learn how to run from that as fast as you can. But if you're working for Jezebel and she hates you because of your faith, and she's mocking you and being cynical and not giving you the promotion, and you want to kill her about every day you go home from work, it may be that that's a trying of your faith, because you're having to work with somebody that's difficult and not scoot out from under it. And because in that moment God is teaching you to be patient and to be trusting and to believe that He has your welfare at hand, and that may be a trial. It may be a trial to keep you from getting bitter and angry, frustrated, mad. So you got to learn the distinction between trials, temptations. Number two, you got to learn the difference between joy and pleasure. Learn the difference between joy and pleasure. Pleasure can be associated with joy, but watch this. But joy is not dependent on pleasure.
That's right.
Now listen, I've heard people say this from the platform. I don't buy into this. They say, well, God doesn't care if you're happy. Let me ask any parent in here. How many parents in here, you just don't flat care whether or not your kids are happy? No, that's not true. I've got 3 children, 3 great son-in-laws, 7 grandchildren, and I'm concerned that they're happy. Now, I realize sometimes in my life I've made them unhappy. But I made them unhappy because I wanted them to live a happy life. And I knew if they continued with the craziness they were doing, they'd end up in an unhappy life. Because prison is not fun. Come on. But here's my point. Pleasure may be involved in joyful moments, but joy is not dependent on every moment to be pleasurable. See, my favorite part of understanding joy, and let me just say this before I read this verse. What's made this worse in our culture is social media. It's heightened this deal that we have now become a hedonistic society. Everything's about pleasure. Come on, we take selfies around everything. Look at my hot dog. Isn't this great? Come on, dude, it's just a hot dog. So I'm at work sweating, and I look on my phone, and there's my friend. He's out eating a hot dog. He's having a great time. Here I am sweating, and he's having pleasure with a hot dog. I'm sitting here sweating. I'm cutting my grass. Man, my life is a miserable life. I must be a low-class loser. Why couldn't I afford somebody to cut my grass so I could be eating hot dogs? And I just want to say this for the record. I am not genetically wired to be happy all the time. I mean, I'm not going to just laugh at it. I cut up a lot. But my wife reminds me, you don't need to be doing that. So I realize I'm not genetically wired. Every day is not one of them days where I'm like, boy, let me take a picture. I'm helping somebody in here today. I saw some guy just turn to his wife and said, now I realize you're a genetic grump. I realize it. I got it. You can't help it. Truth of the matter is, put this verse on the screen. Hebrews chapter 12, verse number 2. Fixing our eyes where? Come on, say it out loud. Where? Who's the pioneer and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Do you realize something? Look at me. The cross was not pleasurable.
Right. Yes, sir.
But the Bible calls it a moment of joy in Jesus' life.
That's right.
Wow.
That's great.
Wow. Here's what I want you to get. We're going to be out of here. Ice cream waits. Key verse. Fixing your eyes where? On Jesus, who for the joy, what? Set before him. Let me make a big statement. Don't miss what I'm about to say. Whatever you have set your gaze on determines the level of joy you'll have. Whatever you fixed your gaze on determines the level of joy you'll have. Jesus fixed his gaze past the cross, past the resurrection, all the way to 2019 and saw you and I sitting here redeemed, picked up out of the pit of hell, washed in the blood of Jesus, and our lives transformed. And he said, I might be taking some nails right now, but I see the day that there's going to be a church in Oklahoma City where people are going to be delivered from addictions, livers are going to be transplanted, drug addicts are going to be free, marriages are going to be put back together. And for the joy of that, I'm enduring this. If you write anything in your notebook, write this. Listen to me closely. Joy is first a focus before it's a feeling. Let me tell you. Let me tell you something that's very important. Listen to me. If being recognized is what you set your gaze on, then you're only joyful when people pay attention to you. If being convenienced is what you got your gaze on, then anything in life that makes you inconvenienced will cause your joy to leave you. Because whatever you set your focus on determines your joy level. Listen, Kathy and I have been married 41 years. She's the greatest thing that ever happened to me in my life. She's also the biggest pain that ever happened to me in my life. It's both, you know. Somebody help. You say amen, right? Yeah. She said same for me. I'm going to talk straightforward. How many of you know? If my focus is on just being with her, if that's all my focus is, just being with her, it doesn't matter what we do. But if I tell her I'm going to be with her and I've got a hidden agenda inside, and then it doesn't come about whatever I was hoping, y'all look at me like, what is he talking about? You know, like if I wanted to go get Andy's custard and she didn't. You know, here's my point. If my focus is just being with her, then we can ride in the truck and hold hands and talk. And I got a joyful experience. Can I tell you why marriages have all kind of disruptions? It's because people have an unexpected focus that their partner doesn't know about, and they can't figure out why everybody's always miserable. Because whatever you focus on is going to determine the level of your joy. Come on, guys. How many of you know that something doesn't have to be void of difficulty in order for me to have joy? Because joy really is a choice. In other words, he said, count it. It's a word that was literally used by a king to say, deem it so. It was particularly used in this way. All of you financial people, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you have, you can do this with a household. If you have a financial statement, you have income and disbursements, income and expenditures. And how many of you know if you want to what they call flip the flow? If your business is in trouble, what do you want to do? You want to flip it. You want to flip all the disbursements into an income column. If you are a person and you feel like you have more burden than you have blessing, if you can flip the burden into the blessing column, it changes your whole outlook. Well, here's what James is saying. Flip the columns. Everything you thought was an expense, start acting like it was an income. Everything you thought was a burden, start acting like it was a blessing. And when you start deeming it to be so, it's amazing how it will change your outlook on life. Because when you count it that way, all of a sudden it's no longer something that's come to hurt you, destroy you, or rob you. It's something that's come to bless you, fulfill you, and take you higher. See, he said, looking at Jesus. In other words, watch this. I can't get joy doing this. What's she doing? What's he done bought? What's she wearing? Did he get the job? Where'd they go on vacation? We got to go there too. What are they doing? What are they doing? What are they doing? And as long as I keep looking this way, I never get happy. I never get joy. Because I have to fix my eyes on something that has to do with the purpose of God for my life. I'm closing with this. A year ago, a little over a year ago, Jack Hayford's been a huge mentor in my life for much of my ministry years. He pastored in LA. He invited a few of us to come to Branson and spend a couple days with him. And while I was there, he's well in his 80s. He's not pastor anymore. He's beginning to get a little fragile. His wife had passed. And he's just sitting on a stool talking to us about ministry and how to maintain a heart of peace and a heart of joy and how to live enjoying life. Because see, what I'm afraid of is there's many people in this room today that some of the stuff you have today was your dream 10 years ago. You were just dreaming of the life you have right now. But you're not enjoying the life you have right now because you keep dreaming about something else. Because there's nothing that ever seems to come to a point of satisfying. You want to know why? My wife said this to me yesterday. She looked at me and she said this, because my temptation, see, the great temptation in my life, I'm a visionary by nature. I don't enjoy projects when they finish because I'm seeing the next one. I'm just telling you, I'm being very, very vulnerable. My staff knows. They've worked with me. They love me. But sometimes I don't celebrate people the way I should because I'm just like, okay, what's next? Let's go. I still got breath in my body. Let's go. And my wife looked at me yesterday and I went back to my room last night and redid these notes to put this story in there. She said, in the moment, Tony, in the moment. She knows me too well. She said, you're already in Sunday morning. You're thinking about church tomorrow. You're thinking about your week. She said, we have a few more hours of sunlight here. In the moment. In the moment. She said that. I got a fresh revelation of a verse. And I remembered Pastor Hayford making this statement because he spent that morning talking about Psalms chapter 16. And here's what Psalm 16 says. Psalm 16 says, the Lord is my portion. You've made known to me everything that's mine. You're my portion. You're my cup. You deal to me according to the day in which I live. In other words, watch this. When he said, the Lord is my portion, here's what he said. He's saying God distributes to each one of us, just like he did manna, a sufficient supply for that day. For that day. That's why Jesus, when he taught us to pray, he said, Father, give us this day our daily bread. You don't have to answer me, but how many of you are already stressed over the end of July? You haven't even enjoyed July 7th. See, David had to get this psalm inside of him. When it looked like other people were going to take his kingdom. When sons didn't turn out the way he thought they should have. And here's what he said. He said, I found out the Lord's my portion. He preserves my inheritance. My lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. In other words, whatever boundary God's put on my life, you know what? So I didn't become one of the top 10 wealthiest people in the world. So I joined that multiple level marketing group, and I didn't get in the top 100. Okay. My lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. But then he makes this incredible statement. You have taught me the paths of life. And here's what I found out. Don't miss this. In your presence, there's fullness of joy. And at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Presence. Everybody say presence. For I got a new revelation. For all those years, every time I've read, in your presence there's fullness of joy, my mind immediately goes to a church service, a worship service. I got to get in his presence. Presence. I got to get in his presence. But here's what I found out. Presence. Presence is not past tense. Presence is not future tense. Presence is present tense. In other words, when I am in the moment, there's fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. You can't make up for yesterday, and you don't know what tomorrow holds, but you can say, as for today, this is the day the Lord has made, and I choose to rejoice and be glad in it. I'm going to learn to be marked by joy. Come on, everybody.